Welcome to the Career Cafe, a podcast to help you thrive in the professional world. Today's episode is on navigating the interview arena, do's and don'ts, online etiquette, and mastering the about me question. So joining us today, we have Brandon Street, Jerry Ross, Mackenzie Jenkins, and myself, the moderator, McKinley Hatch. And we're going to just jump right in about talking about preparing for an interview. So this is really important, and this can make or break the interview process, preparing for an interview. Obviously, I did not prepare for this episode. Oh my goodness, apparently I did not. So let's talk about the importance of preparation and how you can go about that for an interview.
I think this is the single most important part of an interview right here. I think where most people miss the mark is preparing for the interview. Mm-hmm. And that means more than just getting my clothes out the night before, right? Or looking in the mirror and practicing a few interview questions. What it means is that I have thoroughly looked through that job ad to understand, again, how am I a good match for this? I've researched that company. I understand who potentially I'm working with, how I will fit the culture, what my role will be in that company. All those are so important when the employer is interviewing you to really answer questions effectively to help them understand how I match them. But this piece right here is where I think most people miss the mark on interview is before the interview and doing their research.
Yeah, I think you could spend a whole another podcast on this alone. I remember when I was preparing for this job, I had interviewed for a job before and I didn't really prepare as much. And I just remember coming home and I was like, oh my gosh, that was terrible. But then when I was going into this one, I was like, I am going to spend hours researching the company, researching the people who work there, what their mission is, and all these different things, preparing what I would say to specific questions. And I remember after that interview, I went home and was like, I know that I did my best, and whatever happens, happens. But I definitely think that this is the most important part of an interview for sure.
By the way, she got the job.
I did.
She's here
We're
with
glad
us
she's
today.
here too.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Yeah, and I think too, we're going to talk about questions that you can ask, at the end of the interview and other things a little bit later. But I think there's a way for you to research a company to make yourself sound more educated during the questions that you ask. Like one of those, who are your competitors? Why don't you walk in knowing who their competitors are? Sure. There's things that you can do that just by the way that you talk during the interview, the interviewee knows whether you've prepared for this or not.
And they do. They absolutely know. When I actually interviewed for this job 10 years ago, I walked into the interview, and when I shook the gentleman's hand that was meeting me, I already knew who he was. And I introduced I said, Brent, it's nice to meet you. That was the first interaction we had, is me shaking his hand and saying, Brent, it's nice to meet you. And that seems, to him, it seemed very personable that I had done my research and things on that. And as I met the other teammates, I knew who they all were and again, what the role would be on my team. And I think it created more of a comfortable atmosphere in them knowing I was serious about this job, right?
Interview preparation is one of my favorite appointment types with people because I'd done so many years of interviewing prior to this position. It's brutally painful when you have an interviewee that's struggling to just communicate back with you. So I think the preparation stage, there needs to be some portion of it spent on physically getting the words out of your mouth. Find a partner, find someone you trust, find an educated industry professional, and really rehearse and practice the questions to where you're not having to put these things together on the spot. You get the words to come out before you need them.
100% agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Practice wherever, right? Just practice. I remember I was on for this job, me and my husband were on a hike, and I was in the middle of a hike. I'm I'd practiced so much, but he could tell I was just so nervous, like you are sometimes, but preparation can help that. And I was like, okay, we're sitting on this rock in the middle of this hike, and I'm going to do an interview with you. And it was so funny. And look, I guess it worked out too, but.
Yeah, she was hired as well. So we're glad to have her.
I am here. Thank you. Now let's transition into online interview etiquette. We've talked about preparing for an interview. Right now, in the world we live in, a lot of first-round interviews are held remote, online. Discuss, proper etiquette for that.
Distractions. If I had one thing to say, it's distractions. I've done a couple of these to where the person's giving across great information, and I'm looking into the closet or bathroom that's open behind them, the clutter, the dog, the cat, the something. If I gave one piece of advice in this online thing, it would be really managing those distractions that could be. And, you know, some people will really set up time, putting well-placed books behind them or other things. I really work on, I want the interview process, whether it's online or in person, to be eliminated from distractions that could happen, and make sure that they're setting themselves up in a professional spot where if a lawnmower manages to be happening outside, where can you shift to? What are things that you can do to make sure you have a plan, you have a backup plan in case your internet's down? Can you hotspot it to your phone? Have you walked through a stage of progression to eliminate all of those distractions and make sure your online interview is just about your ability to solve the problem that they have?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. But the principle stands for both an in-person and online interview, and that is, like you said, is to make sure they're focused on us and not what's going on around us, right? And so, with that said, there's some other things I'd recommend. You know, I recommend usually the camera is about eye level, right? So your eyes are at the top third of the camera there, and they're not looking up at you or down at you.
Nothing
right?
worse than that up the nose shot.
Exactly. Yeah, don't like that. And then ensuring proper light. That if you have a window behind you and light coming through, that it's going to cause you to shadow, right? And to make sure you're clear and that the equipment is working well, that you've practiced with using that the day before or the morning before. But again, it's all about what we're talking about here is creating an atmosphere where they're listening to you and they're not distracted by anything else going on, right? They can just focus on what you have to say.
Yeah, and I will also mention too, an online interview is still an interview, so make sure that you're dressed for an interview. I don't know if it's just the interviews I've done lately, but I've had a lot of student interviews where they're just dressed in their normal school clothes, and it definitely goes a long way when you're prepared and you're professional and ready for an interview. So,
or something else.
Or worse. Or worse. I've had worse. So
let's avoid worse.
Yeah.
Let's not go there.
Yeah.
I have a question, like genuine question about online interviews. Okay, I'm on a hiring committee right now, right? First round we just completed last week. It drives me crazy, and maybe I'm not okay to say this. I'm curious. When they use their phone on Zoom, you can tell because it's the up and down.
Yep.
It's the landscape or vertical instead of landscape.
Right.
What is our stance on that? I'm genuinely
No, that's
curious.
a good question. And so there are a few things unique with phones. It's not just the fact that you should have it in what we'd probably want to view it in, right? And that's that landscape you're talking about, right?
Right.
But also the fact that if you're holding it, I've had people sit there in it. I've interviewed someone for a professional job sitting in their car, and they were holding that phone, and you know what happens? It bounces up and down. They're trying to set it on the dash. It falls over, and you're like, wow, this is not going great. You know what I mean? I had someone standing outside a grocery store where they're on a vacation, you know, on the phone and things. It just,
Had one in a restaurant.
Really?
Before.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You're like, that looks really good. But the point is, again, it comes back to, again, creating an atmosphere where they can focus on you, right? And I think, if we're personally me, I wouldn't use a phone to do this. I think I'd use some, equipment that I'm confident with and it's not going to be moving around or falling over or anything like that.
My thoughts are, if a phone is the only thing you have, do it. But if you have a better option, I really think there's things that we could do to prepare if you had a computer or something that put you in a better position for that. I think the phone should be a last resort, but if that's all you have and online interviews are where they are, that's what we got. If you're local to Cedar City, reach out and we'll put you into a successful position with that online interview.
Yep. We got some awesome rooms you can come interview in. Thanks for sharing that. I was genuinely curious because it just drives me crazy sometimes because their little face is tiny and I can't see them and I want to see them. Anyway, thank you. Something else I wanted to note on this was checking your sound and video beforehand, right, with a friend and everything, but making sure you're checking that. I've had this happen when we're interviewing someone. It takes them, the first 10 minutes trying to adjust their sound. Oh, it's coming out of this sound bar or this. And I'm like, oh, this is embarrassing for them. I can feel how embarrassed they are right now. Just fix it ahead of time. Make sure it's working, Awesome. Let's talk about do's and don'ts during an interview. A general interview we've talked about online already, so let's talk about kind of an in-person interview, what the do's and don'ts are for those.
So everybody talks about the posture and those types of things that are important, and they are. Don't get me wrong. I mean, good posture and being confident, having eye contact, using your hands, all those are important parts of body language. But I think, a key thing I talk to people about, again, is the paradigm of interviewing. And I feel like at times people go into an interview thinking, I need to answer all of these questions exactly perfect the way they want it. But the hardship of this is we don't know what that is, or they may not even have a perfect answer to that question. They just want to hear what you have to say. And so to me, I talk to people about the importance of going in and doing your homework before, like we talked about, and then learning how to be conversational. The more that I feel like I'm having a back and forth conversation with you about what I'm asking, the more likely I am to feel comfortable with you. If I feel comfortable with you, I trust you. If I trust you, I'm probably going to hire you. And that's the point, is we want to make sure that we go and we don't just, sometimes I feel like that 30-second, do it, right? I got it answered. But to have that conversation and maybe even ask a back question there if you feel that that's appropriate at the time, right?
Yeah, and you said trust, and I really love the interviews where you can just have a conversation. And when someone has a position open, they have a problem they need solved. How can you walk into that interview under the context of, I can solve your problem? And if I can't solve your problem, I'm going to educate myself to be able to better solve your problem than where you currently are. And sometimes I feel like when people get frustrated or they're not sure how to answer, they start making up things. And as an interviewer, I could see it from a mile away. The eyes change, the posture changes. Things just go different when you start creating versus when you start recalling or contributing to what you can do. And it's easy to see from the other side of the table. People just want honest people that can help them solve their problems. And the quicker you can just get down to a basic conversation about that, I think the better your interview is going to go. I also want to talk a little bit about energy, right? And kind of your enthusiasm for topics and your different things, and making sure that when you're coming through with your thoughtful questions and talking about your interest with the company, that you've got some passion behind those statements, and making sure that you're coming across at an energy level that reflects where this position should be.
Yeah, and I think that's, like, as I'm listening to you guys, that is where the preparation is so important, because that's how you can have meaningful conversations and have that energy, because you know what you're talking about. So,
yeah, I love it. A lot of what I've seen in interviews is we ask them the question and they just ramble on, like
Yes.
you said.
Right.
And we're like, okay, that kind of beat around the bush. Like, did they even answer the question? Like, they didn't know what to say, and they're trying to make up something. So preparation, going back to that's really huge in this case. But also knowing, like, just don't. Like, it's just sad. We're like, did they even, like, do we ask them again? Like, we want an answer.
We've had one where I had 12 questions we asked an interviewee, and they actually answered 3 of them. A lot of words came out, a lot of conversation, but when it came down to actually answering the question, they only answered 3 out of 12.
Well, and you weren't looking for a perfect answer, but you're looking, the reason you asked those, there's a reason. You wanted to get certain things from them, right? And so you're wanting them to answer this, and when they don't, it can become frustrating too, right? So those listening skills, preparation, all come into play there, where we can just, answer the questions at that point. But
They just continued to shift to where they were comfortable.
right.
Yes.
Exactly.
They always went back to, I feel good about this, I'm going to keep talking about this, when they weren't answering the questions directly that we were asking.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This ties us right into the next section, how to go about answering the about me question, right? Like, tell us a little bit about yourself. That is an intimidating question for a lot of people, and I don't know about you guys, but in interviews that I've been in, people will say, these are my hobbies, and these are the things. I have this many kids, and this, and we don't want to know that, do we?
We don't. And most of the time we don't. There may be
Most of the
occasions,
time,
there, again, of certain things we'll talk about, hobbies and that. If it's an outdoors job, we love the outdoors, maybe. But the point is, again, this is to me a great resume has a good summary that helps them understand this is already a good candidate. I'm going to learn more about them below. And the tell me about yourself question allows me to summarize who I am and why I'm a great candidate right up front, to set the tone for this, right? To tell them the experiences I've had, the education I have, and why that will help them. Again, some research I've done on them and who they're looking for and why I meet those qualifications. And so it's an opportunity for me to tie myself to the job very closely and talk about the pertinent things that they want to know in a candidate.
And I think you can answer this question, because I think my fear with this question is they're not going to get to know me for who I am if I'm just like, this is what I do, this is what I've learned, and like, the boring answers, right. I guess, instead of saying, oh, I have a dog and she's so cute, you know what I mean? But I think that you can still have energy and be fun with this question and make it more of a conversation piece than just like listing off all of your accomplishments and stuff like that.
I think you bring up a good point, because I think you really can have that. You can still be yourself and answer the questions that they want you to answer, right?
I had a conversation where I was talking with someone about this speech, and my personal phrase is try to exclude mom, dad, brother, sister, dog, cat, right?
Yeah.
Stick to the job classification and how you can help them solve their problem. And the response was, well, I've been a stay-at-home dad for 6 years. Well, okay, that helps them. Using that statement helps them understand what you've been doing for the last 6 years. We don't want to focus there, because when you've been being that stay-at-home dad, you've been developing skills you can now bring into the workforce. That's reasonable because it helps them answer that question, but we don't want it to be a focus of your 90-second about you, statement. It can be in there, but we want to make sure that you're really focusing on skills, education, experiences, achievements, things you can do to bring into the workplace to help them solve their problem.
About 10 years ago, I was interviewing a lady, and I said, tell me about yourself. And the first things she went through was, well, I recently went through a divorce, and, that's been very hard on me, and I have 3 cats. I love my cats. And she went down this road of things that had nothing to do with the job. And quite frankly, everybody talked about being a little uncomfortable. You felt for her, but at the same time, you were a little uncomfortable because of the conversation that was taking place that, boy, the first thing I know about you, right, is the personal hardships going on in your life. And that was a little difficult for us. Unfortunately, she didn't move on in the process because I think that set a tone, right? It set a tone for how it went for her and how it went for us the rest of the interview, right?
Yeah.
I think something else I want to bring up is going back to telling them about your accomplishments in a fun and engaging way that's still your personality. The hiring committee is looking over hundreds and hundreds of applications. By the time they get to the interviews, they don't remember what you've done. They don't remember where you've worked. They don't remember that unless they have their resume right there, which a lot of times they do, right? But sometimes they don't, and it's a good reminder, oh yeah, they did that. Or you have a stack of resumes right here and you're going back-to-back interviews, they're not remembering exactly what you did and all of the,
Well, they may not have been even the one that reviewed it, to be honest with you. Yeah. If you had an applicant tracking system or another person who screens those for you, might be the first time you're seeing that. Yeah. And then,
especially when you've got back-to-backs. I think we've all had back-to-back-to-back, and maybe the first one runs late and all of the rest of them are just scrambled. So that about you question really helps you, click through the 8 resumes you got in your head. Oh, this person. Okay. It kind of helps you associate them to what thing that you've reviewed previously.
Yeah. No, thank you guys. I want to talk about, similar to the about me question, right? How you can share your accomplishments, but also tie it back to that place, right? That you want to work. Let's talk about the importance of telling, or not telling, even showing employers how you can help them, right? We see this a lot in those answers that are just, going on and not really answering the question. Right. Tying it back to how you can help them and something you accomplished and how that you could bring it to the table here, right?
I think that's, that comes to results-driven answers. I mean, you show them by telling them what you've done in the past, right? Like if you have something relatable to what you would do there, you need to show them how you've accomplished that and been effective in doing that in a past job. I mean, that showcasing what you've done by showing what you've done before will help them understand he's probably going to step in and be a great asset to us here as well.
One thing, as I've done a lot of interviews through the professional internship program, one thing that I've noticed is a lot of people will tend to focus on the situation and spend most of the time talking about what it was and why and stuff, but they hardly ever get to the results and like the why this situation or why this answer actually means something to the interviewer. And I would say that's the biggest thing that I see in most of the interviews is people don't actually talk about the results and showing why that situation means something to me.
I agree with that a lot. And I love it when people get to the results. And I also think sometimes, granted, your interview should be mostly upbeat. But I feel like sometimes people always want to pull out my best something that they don't talk about I grew from something.
Yeah.
And as an employer, we want people that succeed and do well and thrive in the business place, but we also want people that may have messed up once or twice, that have learned from that mistake and can take that decision making into the next thing, learning and evolving and pushing business forward.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of messing up, how do we tell our listeners how to handle difficult interview questions to avoid messing up, right? How do we go about that?
So a question like, tell me what somebody who didn't like you would say about you, Jerry.
Everyone likes me.
Oh, good. There you go, Jerry.
That's a
good answer.
Maybe not the right
answer.
Yeah. This is hard. And I feel like sometimes, especially when they get stumped, they're challenging for something. Tell me about a time when you've epically failed, right? And, do you go personal? Do you go business? Do you go into one of these things? And the intention for those questions is to see how you perform under pressure, I believe. And, to kind of see how does this person adjust when they get a little bit nervous? What do they have? Do they get emotional? Are they going to get that emotional here in the workforce?
Or are there any red flags, right? Yeah. That's where some red flags may come out, too, of an individual, right?
Absolutely. And, all of us have done something in our life that we don't want highlighted on our interview day, right? So what can we do to answer those questions in an educated manner that's calm? Some tactics that I've seen used before when we ask a question that stumps someone is I've heard a response of, would you mind repeating the question just to make sure that I'm clear on my answer? And that's giving them a few seconds to put it together in their head. They heard you clearly. They're just stalling for a second to put their answer together to repeat it back or to say, hey, can I just have a couple of seconds to put my response together?
Which there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. Right? We would much rather have people that are going to put things together and make an educated decision rather than just who's the quickest to fly.
Now, I would just say really quickly, I think it's important to make sure you have the growth mindset as you talk about this. Be positive in this. And then we always talk about polishing at the end, right? So making sure that when you end the question, you leave it on a positive note. So you might say, yeah, this was a time that I failed. I learned to grow from this, but here's what I've learned since then, right? And how I'm going to use this in the future.
And make sure you actually answer those questions and don't just say what Jerry said. Because I've had that. Yeah. What's your biggest weakness? Oh, I don't have any weaknesses.
I had someone say chocolate once.
Chocolate.
Yeah, I was like, wow, okay.
That is my biggest weakness.
Right. Well, it's a
I'm
lot
not
of
going
ours.
to bring it up in the interview.
Exactly.
I don't want them to make that judgment right away.
Right.
But yeah, just make sure that you're actually answering it because they want to know, right? Not just, oh, I'm perfect, because you're not.
Yeah. Awesome.
Sorry, you're not perfect,
Jerry. Yeah. Did you hear her? No.
Moment of silence.
Awesome. Last thing I just wanted to mention is the importance of follow-up after an interview, right? Making sure you're either sending them a thank you email, a thank you card, whatever that is, but make sure to do that. And the time frame, what would you say, Brandon?
Well, I think it's important to ask them that as you're leaving. First of all, I will say this. I read a statistic once that said that most people never say they actually want the job in the interview. But those who say that they do are more likely to get that job. So at some point, I try to summarize my interview by saying, thank you so much for having me today. This has been a joy to talk with all of you. I just want you to know something after this interview today. I would really love to have this job. I'd love to work with you all, right? But then say, when can I expect to hear back from you, right? And then when they tell you, it's okay to say, if I don't hear back from you by that time, is it okay if I follow up with you? You know what I mean? Just to kind of see what's going on. That sets a precedence, and you also know then what's appropriate for you to do, right?
Mm-hmm. I've interacted with sales managers to where they've said, if I'm interviewing someone for a sales position and they don't ask me for the job, they're not a sales professional. Meaning, if you're a salesperson and you get people to say yes all day, I need you to get me to say yes today. So what
Bingo.
can you What can you do to turn up the heat a little bit in the interview process and get them to say, if it's not me, what would keep you from saying yes to hiring me today?
That's a sales job.
It's not for everyone. It's not every interview,
Right,
but
exactly.
in sales type interviews, there's things that you can do during your research process. If it's a sales job, you need to make sure you're getting them to say yes.
Yeah, I love it. Definitely research, and make sure you're doing that follow-up because it's very important and it'll make you stand out. So thanks for tuning in today to Career Cafe. I wanted to make sure to invite you all to connect with us on social media at SU Career Center. That's our Instagram handle, so make sure to give us a follow. And then tune in next week for our episode on the art of follow-up. We're going to dive into this further and talk about following up after interviews, but I got to end on an awesome dad joke, you guys. I got fired as a yoga instructor.
Uh-oh.
And I bent over backwards for those people.
Oh, I can't even pull weeds without my back getting sore.
That's terrific.
Thanks for tuning in, listeners. See you next week.